everybody. Welcome back to Middleism Apologetics. This is part two in rebutting of John Watson and Trent, in which I had a debate with them several weeks ago. That would have been 7/23/19. Did Jesus keep his promise to return 2,000 years ago? And as I mentioned in the last video, is that after the main part of the debate was finished over, Trent came in and the two of them had a discussion and carried on about things without actually interacting with me or allowing me to present a more clear picture if they had questions or anything else. So they went on between the two of themselves, which is their right to do, but it doesn't present the whole picture from me. So in this, I'm dealing with the rest of their arguments and things that they've said and that they have talked about, and building a better picture and a bigger picture that wasn't done during the debate in answer to what they're saying here. So let's continue on with what they were saying.
After that takes place, after the city is turned into a ruin, then you have the wedding feast, and then you have salvation.
And they were, from the last video, if you followed in through there, they're talking about the ruin. Somehow or another, the ruin of the city. Terror and pit and a snare are upon you, O inhabitants of the earth. The city that was broken down. The wine, the inhabitants of the earth are scorched. Boom, boom. There's nothing about the ruin of Jerusalem. Nothing in 25 that talks about the ruin of Jerusalem. So these last few verses, then the moons will be confounded and the sun ashamed. For the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. This isn't talking about Jerusalem being the ruin, folks. It's just not.
That salvation is never ending. Isaiah 9 or 6:9, Isaiah 6:9, I think it is, says that.
Let me do one other thing here too. I'm going to show this. All predators say that all prophecy is fulfilled. All prophecy. Every prophecy was fulfilled. I'm still waiting an answer for this. Isaiah 19. In that day the Egyptians will be like women and tremble with fear before the hand of the Lord of hosts. Right? Sounds good? And the land of Judah will become the terror to the Egyptians. What? The land of Judah will become a terror to the Egyptians? Everyone to whom it is mentioned will fear, because the purpose of the Lord of hosts has purposed against them. So in that day there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. One of these will be called the city of destruction. Wow, isn't that interesting? The city of destruction. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at the border. And it will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a Savior and a defender and deliver them. And the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day and worship with sacrifices and offerings, and they will make vows to the Lord and perform them. And the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing, and they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas for mercy and heal them. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. People, I dare you to find any point in history of 70 AD on where any of this prophecy was fulfilled. I dare anybody. That's the big question. Show me where this prophecy was fulfilled. Trent, John, show me how that prophecy was fulfilled by 70 AD.
I just went blank.
Isaiah 6:9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The increase of his kingdom
will never end.
will never end. It's
It'll be
going
on
to be
his
forever.
shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is in perfect conjunction with all of the
The
other
government
passages.
shall be upon his shoulder. He'll be called all this. Of his increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom. So, I asked, as Christ is laying out his second coming, he's describing the events leading up to his second coming in Matthew 24, and he says there's a time of tribulation.
It's not. Of course, he's not leading to the events. Again, this is so contrary to the idea of a thief coming. 24 signs and symbols that he is coming, that the second coming, when a thief comes with no signs and warnings. See the dichotomy there that's brought out. But full predators don't pay attention to that. They just lump it all in together as one thing and refuse to look at those little details. A thief does not come with 24 signs and wonders. So it's not talking about the second coming, it's talking about the second judgment. Or, excuse me, the first judgment, him coming in judgment.
And Daniel says the same thing. Okay, so when John wrote Revelation, in Revelation 1, verse 9, he said, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was in the aisle.
This argues, of course, towards the late date, and it wasn't 62 or 64 or any other early date. It's an impossibility. But the idea, historically, it's written that it was this persecution that happened under Domitian is where John was banished to the island. So, the Roman persecution started in 64. And why was it so hot and heavy against Christians and not necessarily against Jews in the other lands? They never went after Jews in other lands. They didn't do that. Jews lived all over, spread out all over before AD 70. And it was always the Jews in Israel that they attacked because they were trying to fight off the Romans. But they never turned around, went to these other cities and attacked the Jews in those other cities. Corinth, Ephesians, Philippians, all of these other things, they were going after Christians. And the persecution began after 64 against Christians, and it was for this one reason. The common greeting back in those days, and this is historical evidence that these guys never read and study, because to find that out, you have to read other works about those time periods, and they don't do that. The common greeting of that was Hail Caesar, and you notice, yeah, it was Hail Caesar. Where do you think Hitler got that Heil Hitler? It's the same thing. Hail Caesar, and the greeting, of course, was also, hey, Caesar is Lord. Well, Christians refused to do that. They refused to announce Caesar as Lord or to say that greeting. And they were singled out. They were the ones who were being persecuted because they worshiped the God of Israel. They worshiped a separate God. They did not worship other gods. So they were singled out in that way. The number two, they did not look at Caesar as a god, would not worship him and honor him as a god. So Christians were singled out and persecuted for that point and for that reason. And that persecution continued on till about 325 AD, when Constantine, quote unquote, became a Christian and no longer outlawed Christianity. So all of that time, those Christians were always being persecuted all the way through. And there was always pockets of persecution upon those people.
The aisle before, I think he wrote Revelation after he was taken off the island, or was left there. But so
he admits that it was written off after he got off the island. Well, here's the point, and here's the interesting fact, is that whatever common, this again you find in the history books, that when a Caesar banished people to islands or banished them out of the country when they died, it was a common thing for this Roman Senate, because it was usually people of importance that would be banished and not killed, because they would be afraid of the repercussions of other people and other families, that you didn't kill them, but you would banish them. Christians were killed, burned at the stake, fed to the lions. I mean, there was all kinds of things that happened to them. Polycarp, look at the life of the martyrs. And so it was considered important people that they didn't want more trouble of by killing him, so they would banish him to the island of Patmos. Nero was killing Christians all the way across the board. He didn't care who they were. There was a full-on persecution, and that existed and happened until he died in 68. So the point being is this: at 68, the Roman Senate would have released all those people from the banishment. And so John would have been released, and quote unquote, and this is what Gentry argues in Before Jerusalem Fell, is that he would have been released in 68 and could not have been released before 68. This is just a historical fact, but they don't, Watson and those guys haven't done enough study on it to know that would be a historical fact. This is not opinion, this is not doctrine or anything else. It's a historical fact that they would have been released after. And the idea that he was released, I was on the island, means that he was released from it. So why would he have been released? Because somebody released him. And who would that have been? The Roman Senate. Because why? The person who sent him there had died. That's just common sense. And so now he's been released. He's gone back. So whoever it was that sent him back. Well, if he wrote it after, like Trent said, after he got released from Patmos, well, Nero died in 68. Then John would have been released and comes back. He's supposed to write the Revelation, distribute it all to the churches and everything else. But the only problem is that the persecution on the church starts 42 months. That's 3.5 years. So if he came in 70 AD, go back 3.5 years, that goes to 66.5. Do you get that? The beast rules for 3.5 years. Nero died in 68. He can't be the beast because the beast rules for 3.5 years, and it ends with the second coming of Christ. See how Nero can't be the beast? That is just astounding. That logic is completely lost. 68 is, wow. The beast rules. He's killed in Revelation 19 by the second coming. Revealed as the beast by Christ at his second coming. And that's another point that full writers just gloss over.
This tribulation that John is talking about, is it different than the tribulation that Christ was talking about? So if you separate this from the second coming, the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, it was, because the persecution they endured in 70 AD was Romans against the Jews, not against Christians in Jerusalem.
You separate this, Matthew 24, from the second coming, then you have multiple comings, multiple tribulations, multiple,
if we take in that whole Revelation, putting it 2,000 years, yes, there's different comings, as I've explained already. There's different tribulations, as it's even notable that the tribulation did not end. The Christians did not get relief from tribulation in 70 AD. That's just common sense from history. Another point they just completely gloss over and ignore.
15, 17 different trumps blowing, and you have all kinds of numerous numbers of comings.
And that's simply not true. Trumpets blowing? No. What's the idea of a trumpet? It's an announcement. It's preparation for trumpets were, and that'd be interesting. Is there really going to be a trumpet sound that the whole world hears when he comes? That'll be an interesting concept. So a lot of people take that literally. I don't know, and I won't say that it literally trumpets are going to be blown, a voice and command. But I think there's going to be something that happens that gets people's attention. Is the whole idea of those two things, that something is about to happen. Something is just about to happen, and then in a twinkling of an eye, he comes and raises the dead and returns. So it's not multiple trumpets or anything else like that. But he also forgets the idea that there were 7 trumpets in the Revelations, and then there was different trumpet calls for different things that happened. So in Jerusalem, trumpet call of an impending army that's coming in. There'll be a trumpet call for the coming of the king. I mean, they're all different kinds, and so that kind of a bogus kind of argument.
And they want to harp on, this one means appearing, but this one means himself.
Let me address that real quick.
Ridiculous.
Okay, so here's the thing about this.
See what he just called? He said, "This is ridiculous. This appearing. That is what's ridiculous. That is, you see that attitude, because they're trying to lump it into 70. Those are the attitudes that they have. This appearing. How many times did Jesus or Paul teach that Jesus was going to appear? Book of Hebrews, he will appear. But they dismissed that argument completely. Why? when it's the Word of God that says Jesus himself will descend and Jesus himself will appear at his coming. Why is it dismissed? Because, see, you accuse us of dismissing things about time statements. Well, here's a futurist who's telling you 90% of the time statements were about 70 AD and it was fulfilled. I'm not arguing with that. Revelation's time statements are not about the second coming, and when you actually look at the words and everything else and do the actual exegesis on there, they're not talking about these events happening, coming soon, or him coming soon. They don't work.
Jesus said, and Stephen agrees that he said it. He was just wrong. But Jesus said he would have his parousia and his coming in their lifetime.
Parousia and his coming. He keeps wanting to use that second coming. But the parousia, and that's what I've argued all the way through, parousia has two meanings. So did he come in 70 AD with an army that destroyed Jerusalem? Yes. Nobody is arguing against that. What we're telling you, that was not Jesus' personal appearing and coming down to earth as Paul expressed it and talked about it. Thus, the difference. But see, they won't ever get the idea that he will come down. What has Acts 1 said? This Jesus who you saw go up will come back in the same way you saw him go. He went up into heaven from earth. He'll come back from heaven to earth. Plain and simple. Nothing like that was said in the Olivet, that Jesus himself will come down and touch on the earth and be seen or anything at all. In fact, it teaches just the opposite, doesn't it? Go to Matthew 24. I want to. Wow, it shows nothing about Jesus coming down to the earth. In fact, what does it say? Just the opposite. We get to 24 here. What does it say? Right there. Impossible. See, I've told you beforehand. So, if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines from the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpses is, there the vultures were gathered. People, like lightning, flashes across the sky, didn't it? What happened in AD 70? Flashes of lightning across the sky. And anybody said, oh, look, his second coming, he's down here on earth, he's out in the wilderness. Do not go out. He's in this inner room, or he's in this secret place. Do not believe it. Because AD 70 is not about Jesus coming down in the wilderness or in any room or anything else like this. But the lightning that comes from the east which shines, that will be the coming of the Son of Man. It will be like lightning that comes. It's in the skies. It's in the heavens. And it's what they saw over Jerusalem in AD 70. That was not Jesus himself coming out of heaven. Zechariah 14, I'm going to do it. Behold, a day is coming. And it didn't say on this day, on that day. It says, behold, a day is coming of the Lord, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. All the nations. Not just one. All the nations. And the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. All the nations against Jerusalem to battle. So we are talking about, wow, that's interesting. I'll have to talk about it another time. That's something I'm going to have to look at. All the nations to battle, because houses plundered, the women raped, half the city could go into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. That happened in 80 70. So all the nations that gathered against it. Or is this could be talking about something else? That's something I'm going to look at a little bit deeper. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and on the mountains on the olives will be split in two. Half will be moved, and they'll flee to the mountains and all of that. But then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. Then the Lord will go out and fight. On that day that he goes out to fight against them, His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. That's got me right there. I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. I'm going to do a little bit more research on that because I just said a little while ago that all the nations could have been represented in a sense in the Roman army of 70 AD, if that's indeed what this is talking about. Or this could be talking about, if that was talking about a future, that'd be interesting. But there's other signs it doesn't. So it's very well possible I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle that he's talking about the Roman army. In the representation of other nations within that Roman army. I will have to look at that further. But on the day that he comes, he will stand on the Mount of Olives, right? On that day, the Lord will be king over all the earth. And it shall be inhabited, for there shall never be again a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. Well, Jerusalem didn't dwell in security after AD 70 or the New Jerusalem. And all nations will be struck with the plague, and it goes on. Even Judah will fight in Jerusalem, and the surrounding nations shall be collected, and plagues will follow them. And everyone who survives of the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of booth. Now let's go to 12. Behold, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all Israel. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone, and then the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength from the Lord of hosts. David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not suppress that of Judah. On the day the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Judah. On the day I will seek to destroy all the nations that came against Jerusalem. So you see there's that common theme that he's protected. This is not 70 AD and cannot be 70 AD. You cannot have the inhabitants protected on the same day and then destroyed on the same day. Doesn't work. This is very interesting between the 12 and 4. I just saw something in there, and that'll make me go back and look and think.
That some of them would still be alive. Okay, so here's the thing. Are we going to go to Josephus and try to read about how Jesus came? You're not going to do that. Josephus could have cared less, as far as I understand.
Yeah, he could have cared less, but Josephus recorded what happened. What happened? Those were facts and events that took place.
That some say he became a Christian, but he gives you the signs that were visible in the sky, according to Matthew 24. But he's not going to tell you about how the Lord came. It's immaterial.
Yeah, it's immaterial how. Wow. Josephus described, yes, it's immaterial, but what he has to say about it. Is that what you're telling me now? He can describe all the events and all that and everything, but it's immaterial because he didn't care about the second coming. And the problem is, of course, is Revelation 1:7. Every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And Jesus himself will stand on the Mount of Olives. Jesus himself will descend out of heaven. And Jesus himself will appear and stand on the Mount of Olives. But, see, that's not important. Why would Jesus come to the middle of Jerusalem as she's being destroyed? See, that's what doesn't make any sense either. He sent an army to destroy it. Why would he also show up and stand on the Mount of Olives and then call? Here's the big thing. Here's the big thing. See, people call Revelations 20 a recapitulation of the events of AD 70. In other words, Satan was bound. You know, all that in 1,000 years all took place during that 40-year transition. In 70 AD, the millennium ended, and all of that. And so when the 1,000 years, Satan is released and they come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle like their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints, the beloved city. The beloved city is Jerusalem. This is the camp of the saints. It's being described as the camp of the saints. Jerusalem was not the camp of the saints in 70 AD. The saints fled. Camp there is the idea of barracks. It's where an army barracks down and is living. when you look that word up, surrounded the barracks of the saints, the place where the saints were living, and the beloved city which is Jerusalem. So the camp of the saints are living, the saints are living in Jerusalem. Huh. They surrounded it. And then what happens? The beloved city. But fire comes down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. Where are the beast and the false prophet? Leave out that word, better translation. Where are the beast and the false prophet? And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. It doesn't say the beast and the prophets, beast and the false prophet were thrown in with them. It says, where are the beast? And they were there already. So that destroys that kind of a scenario with the language. But wow, when was Israel or Jerusalem the camp of the saints in the beloved city? Doesn't make any sense, people. Doesn't make any sense.
What is material is that he came as he said he would, and the temple falling was the signal that it had all culminated.
See, Jesus never talked about his second coming, and the fact that he was coming down to earth to rule. Never mentioned any of that. Never talked about him coming back down to earth. Not once did he talk about his second coming or his second appearing at all his whole lifetime. You don't get introduced to that idea, him coming back down to this earth, until Acts 1 with the apostles.
Hebrews 9, 8, 9.
There's always three facets to this this coming, right? There's always three things that are involved in this. Number one is the coming of the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, in whatever way he came, it's described in several different ways in the.
No, it's not. The nature of his coming is described as an appearing, and it's his personal presence when his body shows up. What happens along at the same time is what? The resurrection of the dead, all the saints who are dead, and those who are alive are caught up together. So every Christian would have been gathered together to Jesus if he had come. If he's coming to Jerusalem, then that means every dead saint and every living saint would have been gathered to Jerusalem. Let's see what he says.
Bible, okay?
Right.
Two, what happened at his coming? There are two things that happened at his coming. So you have the coming is one element.
Mm-hmm.
Two is what happened. What does the Bible teach? There was a resurrection. And number three, there would be a judgment.
You can't.
No, there is no judgment saying that at his coming that the judgment happens right there of all the dead in the Great White Throne. Throw that up. The judgment happened in 70 AD, of course, was just against the Jews, and they were not considered the world of the ungodly. Everything that's the world of godly is outside of Christ, outside of Judaism.
Separate them.
There's also going to be a vindication of the martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there a vindication of the martyrs? They never explain what's the vindication. Well, see, the real vindication is that when Christ returns with his saints, as I read from you from Zechariah 14:4, 1 Thessalonians 3, that he comes back with his saints, and then the whole narrative of Revelation 19 that he comes with, look at this. What does it say? And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on horses. So the armies of heaven, the saints, that's who's arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, are the saints. They come with them. They come with them. That's where we get the idea of a barracks in 20, because they have come with them. Those who were resurrected and raised, they're the ones that come.
Well, that was a sign of the culmination of the ages and these things.
So now we have multiple vindication of the martyrs. We have multiple comings.
Okay, why would the martyrs be vindicated? That's what I don't understand. In 70 AD, how were they vindicated? How was Peter, Paul, or anybody else who was killed, how were they vindicated? And this is, it was about the prophets that were slew, it is Revelation that talks about the saints, so therefore it's a different thing. It's about the blood of the prophets from Isaiah to Zechariah that the avenging comes, not for the saints. It never mentions Matthew 24 that this is an avenging, or Matthew 23 this is avenging for the saints that are being killed. Look at it real quick. Woe to you, scribes, and everything else, right? Get yourself, you're the son who murdered the prophet Philip measure. Therefore I send you prophets and wise men who you kill and crucify, and some of you will flog in your synagogues. Prophets and wise men and scribes, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah. Not the blood for the saints. The saints are not in that time period. Whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. These things will come upon this generation. This generation that kills the prophets and stones who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered you under my wings. So he's talking about those prophets, not the New Testament saints, that there is vindication. The vindication of the saints is when they return with Christ as his army, as described in Revelation. That did not happen in AD 70.
Multiple descriptions of comings, of different comings of this and that and all this other stuff. And so I ask, is God the author of confusion? Is this written such that the common man with a common education can understand or not?
No. And I mean that you can get the gospel message by reading it. That's the common. There's a whole doctrine on that idea of anybody can just grab it and read it and understand the gospel message and come to Christ. But when you go to study it, how are you going to know, for example, that Matthew 7:13-14 is a reference to an Old Testament passage without studying it? That means you had to look at the Old Testament and go realize, that said here, that said there. Oh, yes, so there's a correlation. How is it that they know that Paul quoted anything from the Old Testament? I mean, they had to know the Old Testament, so that required study. Somebody who just picks it up and starts reading the words of Paul, they're not going to go, that's from the Old Testament. That's from the quote from the Old Testament. They're not going to know unless they study. So this assertion that he's making is not really accurate, is it, people? It's not.
Because if it is not written so that the common man can understand this, then God is a respecter of people. Do I need a PhD? No. Do I need
And the other thing is this. Here's the funny part, is that he's reading an English translation. He's trusting some uninspired man, get that, who took the texts from the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic and copied it into English. And he's saying, we're supposed to be able to understand that just perfectly. That's just fine. No problem whatsoever. Any man can just read it and understand it in English. Well, folks, sorry. That's just dishonest.
college degree to understand this? No.
I'm really glad he didn't go off on that, because he has a tendency to do that. If you watch his videos,
he was really good to that.
I'm not complaining about this. We disagree, but you know what? He didn't cuss me out, which that simply wouldn't happen. I would just hit done. But anyway, he didn't do that, and he was.
And I would have never done that to anybody ever. I've done everything I've done publicly. I've been in Miano's debate. I've always been a gentleman. I've always been very respectful. No matter how much I disagree, I have always been respectful to people and never badmouthed anybody and torn them down. But I will tell you, that was a stupid comment. That was stupid. But like I said, just because you said something stupid doesn't mean you're stupid or that you're not smart. There's a difference, and I've brought this up many times, and this is the whole point of people. Well, I've studied the body all my life. Well, did you study hermeneutics? Did you study rules of hermeneutics and how to do exegesis the correct way? Did you ever study the Greek languages, the Hebrew language? Because it's just not a matter of looking at a word and going to, some lexicon and dictionary and saying, that's what that means words. Because it's in relation to how all those works together. That's called the grammar. We have got to understand the grammar, because sentences back then in the Greek were not written the way our English is. Think of it, a lot of the Greek, it's just like Yoda talking. Remember how we had everything backwards? Well, it's the same thing in the Greek. And so we have to translate it in English and make sense of that. And they admitted it. Roy has admitted that sometimes what they say does not make sense, or was real good at translating it. So this idea that you can just read the Bible and you don't need to study anything else is asinine. I'm working at Emridge, which is a Church of Christ, an affiliate of the school that Ed Stevens just finished with his master's degree. And I'm working on my PhD, and the teachers and professors there, Rodney Cloud, as I mentioned before him, is one of the top Hebrew scholars in the country. So why do they learn that? Why? He's a Church of Christ. Why is it they learn those things and studied those things and are commended for learning them? It blows my mind, this apathy towards learning.
As congenial as you can be, I guess.
Yeah, this thing he said about the salvation in Hebrews 9:28. I believe that the Bible teaches that part of what he said is true, but what you said is also true. There were two things that happened there, because they were being martyred left and right. They were being, brutalized. If you read some of the historical background to what was happening at that time during this biblical.
See, now he mentions it. Well, if you read the historical accounts of what was going on back there, well, if you've read them, then you should understand the other parts of it as well. But you're denying the other parts, and you're saying you just accept what it is that you read and what you want to accept. That's hypocritical.
Biblical times after Christ ascended, after the day of Pentecost, when they were going out, and you start reading some of the stories, and there's a I've seen bits and pieces of it. I've never read it, but I've heard of Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it details some of these things that the Christians went through, the early Christians, at the hands of the Jews or at the hands of the Romans or other governments.
No, you will not read them about at the hands of the Jews. They were never at the hands of the Jews. Fox's Books of Martyr will tell you about the Roman persecution on Christians, and it was never about the Jews. See, I've never read it. You're right. You've never read those things. You just listen to what other people say here and there, but you've never read it for yourself. And so you make stupid statements like that. I don't ever remember any of it talking about the persecution in there from the Jews and killing people. I just don't. Maybe I'm wrong on that point, but hey, I've read a lot of Foxes. I've never saw it.
That were under control of Rome, that they did to appease these Jews, to keep them from revolting, because there were so many Jews. They basically had countries outnumbered, except for if it weren't for the Roman Empire coming into these other cities and taking them over, and they became part of Rome. They were still outnumbering a lot of the people, a lot of the nations. They were outnumbering.
That's true.
And a revolt by them would not look good upon Rome. So it would show a weakness in Rome, as a matter of fact, and cause a civil war. And what did it do? It caused a civil war.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So as a matter of fact, it caused like 2 or 3 civil wars at different periods because of the Jews. So, yeah, the physical aspect of their bodies were redeemed. They were no longer going to be a martyr. They were not going to be hanged upon a cross, or they weren't going to be beheaded or have a limb cut off. They weren't going to be drawn and quartered. They weren't going to be whipped and savagely beaten anymore, because it came by the will and the hands of the Jews. So yeah, there was a redemption of the physical body at that point. They were no longer going to be a sacrifice at that point.
See, now he's justifying the salvation of the body, redemption of the body, and he's justifying this. Wow, I got to go back and listen to that again. Wow, Trent.
This in Rome, as a matter of fact, and caused a civil war. And what did it do? It caused a civil war.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So as a matter of fact, it caused like 2 or 3 civil wars at different periods because of the Jews. So
yeah, afterwards.
Yeah, the physical aspect of it, yeah, their bodies were redeemed. They were no longer going to be a martyr. They were not going to be.
See, they're no longer going to be a martyr's redemption of the body. That is playing out eisegesis, because redemption means to be bought back from. They're not being bought back from martyrdom. That's not what they're being redeemed from, being martyrs or becoming martyrs. Redemption is always the idea that you were sold under something and then you escape that. So they were not escaping from under the Romans at all, or any idea that they could not be martyred again. Because when you're redeemed from something, that means you cannot face that. But they faced martyrdom all the way up to 325 of AD to Constantine, as I've said before. So this idea that the redemption of the body is somehow them being saved from becoming martyrs again is eisegesis. That's reading into it your paradigm.
Upon a cross.
The redemption of the body, let me say it one more time here, is when the body is redeemed from sin and death. Philippians 3:21, he will change our lowly body to become like his glorious body. 1 Corinthians 15, we will be changed, this body, from imperishable to imperishable, immortal, from mortal to immortal. The change that happens with the resurrected body and with the person who is alive. That is the redemption of the body that is being set free from sin and death. Not being set free from the idea that you can get martyred. This is just poor.
Or they weren't going to be beheaded or have a limb cut off. They weren't going to be drawn and quartered. They weren't going to be whipped and savagely.
And that's, he just mentioned Fox's Birth of Martyrs. Another thought that just come to my mind. The Fox's Birth of Book of Martyrs details of what happened to these men. If they were supposed to have been saved from that in 70 AD, it was Polycarp who was set on fire and then fed to the lions. The fire they couldn't set the fire, it wouldn't burn, so they had to tear him apart by the lions. In the, I mean, the history book is full of these Christians who were torn and literally apart before AD 70, all the way up past 80, all the way up for 100 years. So this idea of they were being saved and redeemed from martyr is just, it's asinine, Trent. It's asinine.
Beaten anymore because it came by the will and the hands of the Jews. So yeah, there was a redemption of the physical body at that point. They were no longer going to be a sacrifice at that point.
Yeah.
But the main
sacrifice at that point. See, that's not what redemption means. So Trent, go look at the word redemption. Please go do a study on that. It has nothing to do with being saved from martyrdom. I'm dumbfounded. And then people will listen to this and think, "Oh wow, he's wonderful." You guys who agreed with him, I can't believe you.
point is that yeah, their salvation was brought to man. What separated us? Exactly what you said. What separated us
Was taken out of the way.
was taken out of the way.
The only way that it could have been, and that's when Jesus fulfilled everything that he said he was going to fulfill. In Luke chapter 21, 20? These are the days of vengeance, in which all things were written shall be fulfilled. 20, 21, and so on. So it's a valid point to say, if you believe that Jesus is yet to come, that there is no salvation. That's why Hebrews 9, verse 20.
No. If the redemption of the body is the salvation they're talking about, well, none of us have our bodies been redeemed from sin and death. It's still happening there. See, this is the theology they don't get. So the salvation that I'm waiting for, what Paul says, I hope to attain to the resurrection of the dead, that he will change our lowly body to become like his glorious body. All of that is in the resurrection, then it has not happened yet. We have not been set free from sin and death. It still works within us, as every one of these and full predators all knows that they're sinners just as much as anybody else. As they still commit sin, it still works within their bodies. They still get sick, and it goes on and on and on. So, no.
8 says.
The salvation that happens when it comes then is when we are changed and we no longer have this lowly body. and those who are dead are raised.
Okay? I believe that. I believe that when the Lord would have his second coming, there would be salvation. I think that that is basic Christianity. However, that's not what most people today teach.
Mm-hmm.
They teach, you got salvation today, but Jesus hasn't come. You can't have salvation.
Okay, and here's the stupidity of this. John, please pay attention to this very closely. Was Paul saved? Was Peter saved? Were any of those men who were killed before 78, were they saved? Did they have salvation? Yes. You can find it all the way through. Paul said, we are saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. So you're not taking that into consideration theologically, anything of what Paul said and what salvation is. And it's that process that is finished up with his coming of the body. But as far as the spirit is concerned, we have been transferred out of this darkness into a kingdom of light. We are saved. And we know that because we've been given the guarantee of the Holy Spirit as the down payment to prove that we have been, are, and will be saved. They don't know their theology.
Salvation without the Lord's return.
So
It's impossible to have the pronouncement of the forgiveness of sins, the atonement of sins, without the high priest coming out of the most holy place.
And that there is, man, that's worth another video. I'm going to stop right here because I don't want to go any further. We will deal with that in part 3. Thanks guys for listening, and hold on, this next one is going to be a doozy.